Ed and Mabel Lawrence never saw it coming. What started as a simple 2-week cruise to celebrate their retirement quietly transformed into the greatest adventure of their lives. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Dailydose, like, and share this video. When they first stepped aboard the Ocean Serenity, they were just another elderly couple, blending in among the sea of passengers chasing sunsets and buffets. But the rhythm of life at sea, the gentle sway of the ship, the clink of glasses at dinner, the soft shuffle of slippers on carpeted halls captivated them more deeply than they expected. With no deadlines, no bills, no appointments, and no obligations to anchor them back home, Ed and Mabel began to dream a little bigger. What if they never got off? At first, the idea seemed ridiculous. Surely they couldn't just stay aboard indefinitely, but with each passing day, that fantasy started to feel more attainable. Instead of disembarking with the rest of the passengers, Ed and Mabel simply stayed, quietly, strategically, carefully. They began by switching cabins at the end of the voyage, blending in with fresh faces, embarking for their own getaways. It wasn't hard. Cruises were bustling, chaotic, full of constant movement. Nobody really paid attention to who was coming or going, especially not if you played your part well, and the Lawrences? They played it brilliantly. They became actors in their own private drama. Mabel would mingle with new guests in the lounge, casually asking where they were headed next. Ed would join morning walks on deck, nodding along to conversations about shore excursions he never intended to take. They never stuck with one crowd too long. They dined in different restaurants, attended shows irregularly, and never made themselves memorable. To the crew, they appeared as just another set of older guests, quiet, polite, pleasant, invisible. The secret to their survival was unpredictability. They never stayed in the same room for more than a couple of weeks. Sometimes they upgraded, sometimes they downgraded. Each change reset the perception of them just another couple who had recently come aboard. They developed a rotating cycle of appearances, always staying just ahead of recognition. To the passengers, they were the lovely couple you met at the jazz night, or the duo who always had tea at the back cafe. Familiar, but not too familiar. Months passed, then a year, then 2, and remarkably, no one had noticed. But even the most flawless plans have cracks. Their undoing wasn't some high-tech security system or suspicious officer, it was laundry. A young attendant, new to the ship, noticed something strange. She kept seeing the same names on laundry bags, week after week. Curious, she mentioned it to a colleague. Strange, she mused. I thought they left weeks ago. That casual comment spread like a ripple through the ship's undercurrent. The waiters began to notice. The entertainment staff recognized their faces in crowds from multiple voyages. Someone checked the records and confirmed the suspicion. Ed and Mabel were no longer on any active manifest. A quiet investigation began. The crew started watching them discreetly, observing their patterns, tracking their meals, reviewing footage. And before long, it was clear. Ed and Mabel had become permanent residents on a vessel that was never meant to have any. One evening, the knock came at their cabin door. Calm, polite but unmistakable, they were summoned to the captain's quarters. It was the moment they had anticipated for years. They walked in hand, composed and ready. The captain, flanked by 2 officers, offered them a seat and asked a single question. "How long have you been on board?" Ed chuckled. Mabel smiled softly. And they told the truth. They hadn't planned on staying forever. But 1 month became 6. A year turned into 3. Before they knew it, the Ocean Serenity had become their home. It was cheaper than assisted living, safer than navigating a house alone. Health checks, meals, housekeeping, it was all included. And more than anything, it was free of the loneliness that haunted many in retirement. Here, they had company, activity, laughter, and change. Every day felt new. Every port offered something different. They weren't running from anything. They were chasing the feeling of being alive. The captain listened silently, struggling to hide his astonishment. They hadn't broken any official laws, but they had manipulated the system exploited the cruise line's logistical blind spot. And now that they'd been discovered, something had to be done. After a long pause, the captain leaned forward and offered them a deal. "You can stay until the end of this voyage, but after that, you must disembark." Ed and Mabel nodded. They had always known it couldn't last forever. The final days on board were the most precious. They strolled every corridor, visited every spot that held a memory. The quiet corner of the library where Ed had napped countless afternoons, the small deck where Mabel watched the stars, the bench where they'd once shared cake on Mabel's birthday. Every footstep was a goodbye. As the ship pulled into port one last time, they stood at the railing, watching the sunrise over the harbor. The sea breeze carried a salty farewell. They descended the gangway slowly, their feet uncertain on the dock. It had been 10 years since they'd felt solid ground. What came next was jarring. Their old life was gone. They had sold their home, closed their accounts, and cut most ties before what was supposed to be a short cruise. Now they faced a world they no longer belonged to. Everything had changed. Smartphones, touchscreens, streaming services, self-checkout lanes. It all moved too fast, too loud, too digital. Relearning life was exhausting, and the silence was the hardest part. There were no bells announcing dinner, no daily itineraries, no quiet hum of ocean beneath their feet, just stillness. They tried, attended workshops, joined community groups, reached out to old friends. But many had moved on or passed on. The world had gone forward. Ed and Mabel felt left behind. Yet, even in the noise of cities and the quiet of empty rooms, one thing kept calling to them: the ocean. They found themselves drawn to the water like it was a magnet pulling at something deep inside them. On weekends, they visited ports and marinas, watching massive cruise ships slowly drift away, their horns echoing across the bay. They would stand in silence, holding hands, eyes following the disappearing silhouettes. That's when they knew being back on land wasn't the end of their journey. It was just a pause. So, a year after they had disembarked the Ocean Serenity, Ed and Mabel booked a short cruise, just a week, just to feel it again. The moment they stepped back onto the deck, it was like greeting an old friend. The ship had changed, the crew unfamiliar, but the essence, the rhythm, the breeze, the gentle sway was exactly the same. It stirred something in them they couldn't ignore. The short trip became a habit, a cruise every few months. New destinations, new faces, but the same feeling. And word started to spread. Their story, now quietly circulating in travel forums and among cruise staff, became a legend. Some called it the greatest retirement story ever told. Fellow passengers would ask, only half joking, "Were you the couple who lived on a cruise ship for 10 years? Ed would chuckle and Mabel would wink, never confirming, never denying. It became their little game. People started seeking their advice: how to pack light for long trips, how to book back-to-back cruises without drawing attention, how to find solitude even in crowded spaces. But they never gave away their full playbook. That part of the story remained theirs alone. Years passed. Their bodies slowed. The long cruises became harder, so they shortened their voyages, choosing comfort over length. But every trip still reignited the spark they thought they'd left behind. Every ship, every sunset, reminded them of who they had been and who they still were at heart. Eventually, they decided to plan one last grand adventure. A world cruise, dozens of countries, all 7 continents, an odyssey that spanned oceans and touched nearly every corner of the globe. It was their farewell to the sea. Every stop along the journey felt like a victory lap. They revisited cities they hadn't seen in over a decade, walked ancient streets, sipped wine at seaside cafes, took photographs they knew they'd revisit often in the quiet days to come. And on the final night, as the ship neared its final port, they stood together at the stern, watching the moon cast silver ribbons on the water. "This," Mabel whispered, "was the life we chose." They settled in a quiet coastal town afterward, a little cottage with a wide porch and a view of the sea. The sound of waves rolling onto the shore was different from the deep creaks and hums of a ship, but it was close enough to bring comfort, to bring peace. Their days were slow now, morning walks, coffee and silence, pages of books fluttering in the breeze. Sometimes, former crew members from the Ocean Serenity would stop by. Old friends, younger travelers who had heard the tale and wanted to see if it was true. Ed and Mabel never bragged, never elaborated, but their eyes sparkled in a way that said, "Yes, we lived it." Their story became something bigger than themselves, a whispered legend shared over dinners and buffets, in crew quarters and at sunset lounges. A tale about a couple who broke the rules, not for fame or fortune, but simply to live. They had found freedom not on a beach, not in a mansion, but on a moving vessel in the middle of the sea. And one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned the color of amber and fire, Mabel turned to Ed, her voice barely louder than the breeze. "We did it," she said with a smile. Ed reached over, took her hand, and squeezed it gently. They had.